Did ancient Ireland have special laws for craftspeople? Well, Dag Agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan, Irish Pagan School here, and I am making many a short jump through Ireland's ancient laws known as the Brehon laws, exploring a whole variety of topics. Brehon is the Old Irish word for a judge, and the judges were a subcategory of Druid. And so they formed a very intrinsically important part of ancient tribal structure. And so the laws laid down by these Brehons really established value of everything in ancient Irish society, which means they're a great, great resource for us looking at the structure of society and what's involved in those, and the crafts involved in ancient Irish society because of how they were documented and recorded by the Brehons. So, the an understanding that has to be laid down is the Brehon law wasn't punitive justice; it was restorative justice. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't circumstances in the law where there could be blood loss, bloodletting, harm, or hurt done, but there was also grounds for like illegal or like there was okay, so there was times when legal blood loss was going to occur, usually when a physician is doing work, but there's also a need to quantify what then is illegal blood loss so that can be adjusted for. And the reason why this is so important and so detailed is because any kind of cost or harm involved with those circumstances would have to be made up for, would have to be paid for, either by the individual, the offender himself, or by their kin group, known as Finne, Fine, or by the lord of a territory that they owed allegiance to. So there's a lot of very important areas, a lot of very important information in this section of Irish lore and information when we look at it. And I'm staggering over my introduction here because I know I'm already jumping into my content. I'm excited about the content. My guide to this is the book I'm reading at the moment is a guide to early Irish law by Fergus Kelly. I have left it, literally walked away from it to do my recording where I was sitting there and reading it. And it's a great resource. My partner Laura literally pulled it off the bookshelf here and was like, This is the book. And that is the book that we recommend, by the way. It is out of print. You might have a hard time finding it, but there are also resources online, digital resources available on places like ucckelt.ie, which is the Celt project hosted by University College Cork. So if you are looking to dive further, if you want John to cite his sources up front, I will do my best with this. And so there's three main texts, or three main kind of, again, it's not even a text. These are reproduced writings across multiple medieval manuscripts. But when we look at the collections of those, there's the tree known as the Bretha Credine, so that's Bretha Cróide, Lige. So if you wanted to search or look that up on the digital archive, as I mentioned, there's also the Cree Gavelach, that's Crith, sorry, Cri Fada Th, and then Gablach, Gablach, and which is the oh, that's gone and jumped out of my head. I had the translation on that just before I started speaking, but I glanced at my notes to check the name on the third document, which is known as Becc, and so that's spelled Uraicecht, and it is Becc, Becc. So these are the three main kind of documents or collected works of legal note that we look at across a lot of Irish society, the structure of Irish society, the breaking down of things. But within each of these, there's also sub-documents. And when we're looking for craftsmen specifically, Becc is the one where we find a lot of information. But there's also another document known as the Bretha Credine, which is a specific document related to physicians. So I've skipped a part ahead, but neat answer, not hard to say. Yes, there is multiple different sections of ancient Irish law that dealt specifically with craftspeople. So the Brehon Law, as I said, breaks down the roles and the jobs of a physician and how important they were to tribal rule, but also then their liabilities and also where they couldn't be held liable because a physician's job would inherently involve a certain amount of blood loss as they're doing their surgeries or their work. Because it wasn't just herb lore, it wasn't just medicinal treatments, it wasn't just magic fountains of youth. It also included surgery and surgical practices. And so a physician had to be able to engage in their work without being held liable. as long as they're engaging in that work, and they have to be able to justify that and the work they do with a Brehon. So the source for that is actually known as Brehon Credine. And the reason why I like to mention that one is Credine is the ancient Irish god of physics or medicine. And it is more, as I said, beyond just medicine herbs or magic words or prayers, because that was Dean Keck's territory too. It does actually involve surgery, most famously when we look at the mythological era where Nuada gets a silver arm. So he has a silver animatronic arm. It's pretty much a cybernetic arm built for him by Credine, the silversmith, and Dean Keck, the surgeon. And so uh, there's examples within the mythology of these practices, and so the fact that the name of the gods actually made it down onto these documents, onto these laws, is very fascinating. And again, it wasn't just Bretha Credine. There's also records of Bretha Credine, who was that other person in the mythological story. Credine is a silver or coppersmith, and so we have lost the document. We've lost the actual source for the original Bretha Credine, but we have later sources that cite it as a reference and cite information from it, which means that we do know it existed. And part of the other kind of documents which talk about judgment, specifically I think it's the Brehon Law, it talks about how a judge, who was also one of our very important people, the Brehons themselves, they had to have sufficient knowledge in a number of different expertise to be able to give their judgments. And the expertise listed are Brehon Kecht, Bretha Credine, but it also then talks about Brehon Goibniu and Brehon Luchtae. So Goibniu is the smithing god of the Tuatha De Danann, and Luchtae was the woodworking god of the Tuatha De Danann. And so all of the information talks about the judgments of Dean Keck, the judgments of Goibniu. So it's entirely possible there were other older texts that were breaking down the responsibilities and the obligations of blacksmiths and woodworkers in the same way we have this reference to the lost coppersmith, silversmith, Credina. Now, I feel like I'm jumping all over the place with this, but I am very excited about this topic, so please forgive us for that. But it was very, very important within ancient tribal structure that a person's honor price was quantified properly. And when we talk about honor price, it's not just a weregild or a blood price. It is your blood price if harm is done to you or if you are slain. It is that value that has to be made up for this recompense. But it also functions in a number of other ways. Your honor price was your own value, your own ability to give assurances. So you would kind of swear on your name or swear on your face or face value because that was your honor price. And so someone couldn't make an agreement or couldn't make any kind of contract or lending or ownership or promises or assurances for an amount greater than their own honor price. And so for someone working in a craft, working in a skill, this was pretty important to quantify because if you need to make an agreement to source, say, metal for your workings, for your craft, as a blacksmith, the only amount you can give assurances of or like promise against is your own honor price. So that would then have to be quantified. In the same way, if you had to get someone to bring you wood, you can only give an assurance or a guarantee based on your honor price or your face value, as it were. So the status of this meant that craftspeople within ancient Irish society held a very special role. They were not just regular lay people. They weren't just regular individuals who were going around farming, or they weren't serfdoms who were kind of trading their skills or their time or their labor for sustenance or a place to work and live. Craftsmen were an exception in a lot of ways because what they did or what they produced supported the tribe as a whole. But not all craftsmen were made equal. So even within the law itself, it does break down a hierarchy of craftsmen. So at the upper end of honor price for craftsmen, we have, of course, the physician, as I mentioned, the person who does all of the healing, the medicine work, and the surgeries. We then have the blacksmith, which also includes copper and silversmith. So if you're a silversmith or a coppersmith, you're treated as a blacksmith in the same circumstance for honor price, costings, etc. But also responsibilities. Then there was the wright, who was your woodworker. Again, all of these then top three straight away: physician, Bretha Credine, blacksmith, Bretha Goibniu, and then or Bretha Credine that we have mentioned for the coppersmith. and then write Brehon Luchtae, so this woodworking. So those are your main top individuals, but there's also another gr people considered in this higher value craftsmen, and they were in fact lawyers. So already, if you've been following me along with this series here, or even just being in this video now for the first few minutes, you're realizing that the ancient Irish law wasn't have at it, laissez-faire, do what you want. It was very detailed, very specific, and the people who gave judgments had to be able to give right judgments because if they gave false judgments, incorrect or inept judgments, their honor price had to be paid. And so their value was held in question about that. And then they would be fined based on that. And they could, of course, lose their status in that society. And so a lawyer was known as a Brehon, Brithem, or another word for that was an aigne, Aigne. Now, the Brehon tended to sit more in judgments, or they would be the person who would mediate what goes on between things. But an aigne was different. An aigne was an individual who stood in representation on behalf of someone else. So you would have this aigne, much like we have now modern lawyers. If a person doesn't have a kin group whose head person would stand for them, because that was what happened most commonly, they could pay an aigne, an expert in the laws who would speak on their behalf and be able to help adjudicate things for them so they don't get lost in the woods. Um, what's great about this is it actually does quantify the type of disputes that a Brehon or an aigne could adjudicate on based on their own honor price. So if they don't have a high enough honor price, they can't actually be deemed worthy enough to judge what's involved. So if at a certain point the dispute is going into 10 cattle as opposed to five, suddenly someone's honor price comes in and it's like, okay, well, sorry, you're not qualified enough to deal with this quantifiable loss. And they'd have to go up the chain and find someone with a higher honor price. So what's great also here is that you wouldn't pay your lawyer, your Brehon or your aigne up front. Their payment would be a percentage of whatever was won in the dispute. So a person who gets a judgment in their favor then pays a percentage of what they actually won. A person who lost gets nothing. So now modern day parallel might be the no win, no fee lawyers that we see these days. Maybe in some way that is pulling from an honoring ancient Irish tradition. Um, but so these were very important people of craft within the tribal structure and within the tribal society, such that their status based on their honor price could change and could shift. So even within physicians, blacksmiths, lawyers, rights, there were grades, subgrades based on their expertise, which means that they could elevate their honor price to such a degree that the honor price may actually equate to that of a lord or petty lord, which means that they would then be reclassified not just as a regular layperson of the tribe, but as Nemed. And Nemed was the upper structure or people of privilege within the tribe. And so, unlike other cultures or early cultures where certain people born into a noble caste, or there is a noble caste which you have to have bloodline in, that was not the way in Ireland. The Nemed were a caste of privileged people. Yes, a lot of people were born into that caste, absolutely. But that wasn't the only way to enter that caste. If a farmer generated enough wealth, then their grandson could become a lower lord, a lord of vassalry, and they would become Nemed. Similarly, if a craftsperson had enough excellence, if they were so great in their skill, then they're no longer just a regular layperson. They are a Nemed. They are seen as a person of privilege, which means that their honor price or their value increases. So it really showed that there was a recognition within the society as well for the value of these craftspeople. So I've only given four types of craftspeople there, but there is another grade of lower craftsmen, and certain jobs, though of value, were not seen in the same light or seen of the same way. So below, of course, lawyers, we have chariot builders. Again, very important to get your ride and have people who keep that going well for you, but it's not a core value to the tribe. Below that again is what's known as an engraver, someone who did engraving work, leather work, or ring maker. But interestingly, a comb maker down at the very lowest of society for craftspeople. Now, these are not like regular farmers. These are people of skill and of talent. at the very lowest was the leather worker, the ring maker, and the comb maker. Now, I wanted to include a bit of information about the comb maker here because I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Um, the legal text where it talks about the comb maker, I think it's Uraicecht, that's what my notes have here. The person who wrote it didn't really seem to give props to the comb maker for their effort and for their skill, mainly because the main resource for their craft had to be sourced from middens. Now, a midden is a dump or a dumping ground or a dunghill in many ways. So within the structures of society, the lords might have a feast, they'd have carcasses, deer, or they'd have antlers or sheep or whatever, and then the bones of that would be cast out into the midden. But the comb maker, needing bones or antlers or horns for their craft, would invariably have to go into the midden to get it. But it does go a little bit more than that because just because someone's a comb maker and they are kind of getting ridiculed in this way, there's still gradients of excellence here. There's still a level of skill which is recognized because there is, and this is one thing I loved to bring in, there's three things that justify a comb maker's skill. So someone might be able to get an antler or get a bone and make a comb out of it, okay, but you are not a comb maker unless you can do the three following things. So the first thing is to race a dog to a bone. So if you're going to be sourcing again bones for your craft, you have to be able to outrun a dog chasing down that same bone for you to be able to get it. So that's the first thing. The second thing was to straighten a horn using only your breath. So you're not using any heat, not using any water. You'd have to be able to breathe on on the horn, any kind of a horn, sheep horn, ram horn, antler, and be able to straighten that out using just the heat of your breath was your second task or second trial. And the third one, eh, okay, I found it entertaining, but it is a little bit saddening too. But the third thing you'd have to be able to do was a chanting over a dunghill so as to bring to the top the antlers, the bones, and the horns. So, in a way, like it may be bringing in that like, you'd have to be able to speak over the dunghill, and like there may be some mystical practice involved. Or, from another point of view, it may be that if you're saying the right things, if you're speaking the right words, you may be lucky enough to have the bones, antlers, and combs, or horns nearer the top. Or from another mindset, just the imagery of it, just a person going in, climbing into a dunghill to try and find the sources for their craft, and they're cussing and blinding out of it because they have to climb over all the bones and the rocks in the waste. And so that then is a recognized part of their craft and their expertise as a comb maker. So, just to round off the video there, talking about honor prices, we've talked about the different statuses of privilege and the importance. For people in certain statuses, you could lose your honor price. Again, if a judge gave poor judgments, they could lose their status and lose their honor price. If a chieftain, for example, was found not fit for their job or not fit for service, they could lose their honor price and they could then lose their status within society. So there are many, many ways that someone could have their honor price reduced. If they are, committed of a crime, if they're removed from the Tua, if they're cast out of tribal lands, essentially, they become a non-person. So there's a lot of different things involved with that. But one thing to round this off, which I found really fascinating and speaks to the importance of craft members with people of craft and people of skill within tribal life. Uruk Beck, this core document for the legal structures, states that a craft person's honor price does not diminish even if they stop practicing their craft. So even if our lowly comb maker is no longer climbing into the middens to get the resources to make the combs, the fact that they were recognized as a comb maker beforehand, even if they're no longer making combs, they still keep that honor price. They still keep their value. Even down to our lowly leather worker, if they stop producing leather goods, they have been a leather worker. Now, of course, probably in society, tribal society, they'd be passing on their skills, they'd be passing on their education to other people. So the recognition, I think, of the knowledge and the skill and the expertise involved in craft is retained, even if you yourself are not practicing that craft. So this has been my short hop and video around the structure and the ancient Irish laws on craftspeople. As I said, I am I'm avidly into this book. I'm absolutely storming through and really, really enjoying it. Um, but this is not the only content we have available here at the Irish Pagan School. If you would like to explore more free content, of course, like, subscribe, follow on here. There's other videos. I've done a series here on the Irish laws. You can just look that up or follow the links at the end there. But you can also go to irishpagan.school/free, and you'll find a long list there of blog posts, resource guides, book recommendations, even guided meditations, and even free full courses of teaching at our school, the Irish Pagan School. So until next time, look after yourself, take care, August Slán. Goodbye.